unveiling of the National World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. Our moderator today is John Adair, who is completing Project 1 on the Advanced Manual Facilitating Discussions. As moderator, John acts as toastmaster, explaining the topic, introducing the speakers, and controlling the discussion time. So here's the boss. Pay attention to him. The title of this panel discussion is Bringing the World War II Memorial Home. Please welcome John Adair and our three distinguished guests.
As Cesar pointed out, we are really blessed today to have two World War II veterans and also the individual that brought about the honor flights and honoring these 1,500 people that he took to Washington on 7 flights. And the idea is to get a feeling of the experiences that these gentlemen received when they went to Washington and saw this monument for the first time. There are two things that we really would like to accomplish out of this meeting today. And one is to recognize the monument and for what it, or the memorial for what it stands. But the second thing we might want to get out of this is this could be a format, Toastmasters format. It can be used in every little community, everywhere, to honor our World War II veterans. Bill took these people to Washington to see the monument. Now this gives us an opportunity maybe to bring the memories of the monument and the memorial back to the people. I'd like to introduce the panel. First we'll start with Charlie. Charlie Peters went into the service in World War II in December of 1942. Served mainly in England, in Southampton, when preparing for D-Day. He helped assemble all of this material that was throughout England that was brought over for the war and funnel it down into putting it on the boats and getting it ready for D-Day. And after that, he was transferred to France, then into the Battle of the Bulge, where he received a battle star. Ray Reinders, a young man, 17 years old in 1945, decided he'd rather go into the Navy, enlisted, went to boot camp, and right after boot camp, he was transferred to Midway and was transferred into the transportation pool. He said he worked from fixing Jeeps to the 10-ton trucks. I asked if he had any narrow escapes. He said, yeah, one. In April 1 of 1946, the Aleutian Islands had an earthquake, and the tidal wave was coming to Midway, and it had not been for the coral reef, he wouldn't be here, and neither would Midway. Now, Bill Williams, it's hard to describe all the things that he's done for the veterans, but the main thing is that he and Yvonne, his wife, developed and created and put together 7 flights for gentlemen like Ray and Charlie to see this monument for the first time and even perhaps the last time. He's been involved in many other veterans organizations, bringing the ones that were in Bataan, and most recently the ones that flew on the Jimmy Doolittle flight, and now is working on a project to recognize the fallen heroes in the War on Terror. Bill Williams. We're going to here a little Toastmasters ritual. We have what we call the timer. So if you want to talk, we have a light goes on that tells you when to The green light goes on. You're given 3 to 4 minutes. The green light goes on, it'll be 3 minutes. Yellow light, 3.5, and the red light, 4. And this gives you all the time.
Sit down, right?
This is a format like a coffee, like we have coffee. We're not going to stand, we're going to sit and visit.
Okay.
We think that sometimes veterans don't like to make a speech and get up and talk about their war efforts, but if they're over a cup of coffee, they might be more relaxed. And this is what we want. This is why the discussion format is so valuable, is to get information from people on a more personal and yet non-invasive basis. Well, let me sit down and let me begin some questions. The first question will go to Charlie, and maybe we'll ask the same question to each of you. Charlie, when you went on the honor flight to see the memorial, and you walked up to see it for the first time, what did you feel from your heart at that moment?
Well, actually, I had, as you can imagine, I had several feelings. One was extensive gratitude for being selected to go on this flight, and particularly for Bill Williams' efforts to get us there. It was an extraordinary experience. No one ever dreamed it. I never dreamed that I'd be going on a free trip to Washington and all the terminals. It was really wonderful. Secondly, I have a picture here you can pass around. This memorial is a feeling of peace. It's there's ponds and there's fountains and the colonnades, each colonnade for each state, and it's just a feeling of peace and unity at that point. And I think that's probably the principal memory of World War II, is that everybody got together. There was a few on the other side, but almost all Americans were all on one side. And it's probably the only time that's happened for a long time, if ever. But everybody was working together. So that's...
Thank you, Charlie. Ray, let me ask you the same question. When you saw this for the first time, you walked up to it, didn't know what to expect, what was your gut feeling and your heartfelt feeling when you saw it?
Well, each state had their memorial, and to me it was just like all the states holding hands, and how close they were together.
That's wonderful.
And I just didn't imagine it was such a beautiful thing. It was really beautiful.
You think it did respect for the...
Yes, it did. It did. And they really had a choice location where it was put too. It was just in an ideal location. So many interesting things right around it.
Okay. Bill, you've seen this monument memorial
several times. Yes, I have.
And probably see it many times again, but you saw it for the first time when you went sometime. You saw it 7 times, I know for sure. What was your feeling?
Well, with the 7 flights, I think the thing that sticks with all the volunteers and the guardians who are involved is watching the veterans and their excitement and their joy and having the opportunity to see it. It wasn't completed till 2004, so therein was the problem, because most guys on their own could not have made that trip to see it. Now, had it been built 25 years ago, there would have been no need to have honor flights. But that was the great part of it. It was all the excitement of all our buses pulling up and unloading and spending an hour or more at the World War II Memorial. I think a lot about the guys who didn't get to see it. We had a man, John Zamola from Fremont, and he was set to go on a Tuesday flight, And the Friday before, in the afternoon, my cell phone rang. It was his wife in tears. She says, "Bill, John doesn't get to go. He died this morning." So after that flight, a couple of days later, Yvonne and I took his red shirt up to her to give it to her that he would have received. And she took us in the bedroom and showed us his clothes laid out and his shoes shined for 2 weeks, waiting for his opportunity to go on the honor flight. He didn't get to go. And we had several, at least a dozen times where veterans who had died before the flight, we took a photo from the family, took it over to the Nebraska column, had an easel and a wreath, we put it on there, then we took the shot so that the family could have that.
That's wonderful.
So yeah, it was. These guys agree. It was fun. It was exciting. An opportunity that they wouldn't have received without all the generous people who donated to the honor flight programs.
Is this honor flight still going on?
States are still doing it. Our effort completed in April of '09. And it's difficult now for states that are doing it because these veterans are aging and it's more and more difficult health-wise for them to go. We are still, this is kind of interesting, 66,000 World War II veterans from around the country have gone on the various honor flights. We're the only state to have a man die on an honor flight, which is really off the chart, unbelievable given the health condition of some of the veterans. But we're still the only state to have a man die. But he was from Seward, Nebraska, and got to see the World War II Memorial. Had a great time. On the way home, 20 minutes out of the Lincoln Airport, and we had his daughter go with him because his health was so poor. She was a nurse in Lincoln. He turned to his daughter and said, "This has been wonderful spending this day together to see the World War II Memorial." Cindy said, "Dad, are you feeling all right?" He smiled at her.
Wow.
Gone.
That was a flight I was on.
Yep. Charlie was on that flight. And, Cindy's reaction could have been, I sent my father in good faith and it was 100 degrees. Remember how hot it was, Charlie? Oh,
Yep.
It's brutal. Anybody's been there in summertime knows how humid. But Cindy's reaction was, he got to go. He died in the company of his comrades. And at his burial in Lincoln, we came over the hill and there were 30 veterans from that second flight from the Lincoln area in their red shirts and their black VFW hats. They formed two lines from the road to the burial site, and when the casket came down the line, they all stood as straight as they could and saluted. I'll never forget it.
That brings tears to my eyes too.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, I had a guy from the first flight call me. He says, "I wish it would have been me." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "I'm probably going to die face down in my oatmeal in the nursing home." He says, "If I could die with some fun," he says, "I'd take it." So it's all perspective, right, John? So it's all how you look at it.
Well, you mentioned something, Charlie, that I thought was impressive. You walked around and you saw the entire monument memorial. You mentioned the colonnades of the states. Could you elaborate a little more on what each of those colonnades said and did and the message that it gave?
Yeah, I will pass around the picture because it's a little hard to visualize, but each state had a column. It's a white, I don't know what material, maybe marble, I expect. And it had the name, of course, at the top. And again, the idea of the unity, I think, was the key, is there were all these columns all around and all together. And I can't find it right now, but I had my picture taken with a Nebraska column. But it was a good symbol. I think the Leo Daly Company itself here in Omaha had a hand in the design. There was another company involved also, but it's somebody was with a great vision, put it together.
Ray, what were some of the things specifically you mentioned earlier that you saw, but the ones that stick in your mind today after you've seen it, that still remember that if you went back and you'd want to point this out to people of what it meant significantly to you? What is it about that memorial that maybe hit you the hardest?
Well, it was so much nicer than I ever realized it was, and it was just so nice to see all of the states together on what each had a column, and one thing about everything that happened, I can't believe how well organized the Williams did on this. The people in the wheelchairs were all taken care of, and it just, everything went perfect.
Let's even have lunch.
every time it was time, we ate.
That's wonderful.
And then the preliminary things, we all got together before we left and had a banquet, and it was just great. And then after we got home, we had a kind of reunion a year afterwards, and it's just unbelievable what the Williams did for us.
Thank you.
And how smooth everything went. Everything was just organized perfect.
Yeah.
Ray was on the second to the last flight, and we called it Operation Airlift. So we took a 747 2 days in a row. Now there were people in town that tried to talk me out of it. It was too risky because a health problem on the plane, it has to drop down in Cleveland, or a mechanical problem with that 747, because we had every hotel room in the Holiday Inn. Now it's what's it called, 72nd Grover, Oceans of Fun, or whatever it is. So we had every room in that hotel. We had every room in the Comfort on the south side of Grover, and we had most of that Ramada on the frontage part. So there's 403 seats on a 747. We put 375 on Thursday. That's 65 first class and 27 in the upper deck. So we took 375 veterans on Thursday, and then 24 hours later, we took a whole other 375. So I'll never forget the very last flight, and we're sitting on the tarmac, all 10 buses, because we didn't go through the terminal because there's only so much energy in the glass here. We didn't want to wear them out. So the buses pulled right beside the plane. So at 4:30 in the morning, we're sitting here for 30 minutes, waiting till 5 o'clock when we can load. So everybody's looking out the window at this huge plane. I mean, it looks like the space shuttle times 10. I mean, everybody's been on a 747. This is a big bird. So I'm walking in the dark down the aisle of one of the buses, and a veteran pulled on my sleeve. He says, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." And so I knelt down beside him, and he said, "I'm scared to get on that plane." He says, "I've never flown before."
Oh, boy.
Ooh.
I said, "Well, let's talk about it." I said, "You survived the Depression." He said, "Very difficult on my family." I said, "You survived World War II." He says, "Combat Pacific." I said, "How old are you?" He said, 93. I said, 93. I said, "By anybody's measure, you have already won the race. You survived the Depression. You survived World War II. You survived life in general." I said, "What's the worst that can happen? You die on that plane? So what?" He looked at me and he said, "Let's go." So the thing I want to say about the generation and doing the honor flights, no whining, no complaining. It was all about, tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do my best to do it. And baby boomers, I'm 60. The joke goes that if you took baby boomers on a trip like this, 10 to 15% of us would whine about the mustard on the turkey sandwich. Right? But with this group, there was none of that.
was going to mention that.
Yeah. and the humor of the generation. One of the flights, I don't remember which one, but the buses pull up to the outside gate down at Eppley. So they took the bomb-sniffing dogs around each of the buses. One of our veterans yelled out, "I hope those dogs can't sniff out Viagra." That's the way it was. You know, there was no whining or anything. It was all, and those guys, and we took a dozen women veterans. They had to walk up those stairs.
Oh boy.
And on that 747, that thing's up in the air. Right there.
The cockpit is just.
Yeah, well then Ray got to go in the cockpit of the 747. Really? He's a pilot, so they took him into the cockpit. So
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
In case it broke down, you knew how to fix the plane, right?
Yeah, I was just dumbfounded when the pilot asked me if I'd care to come in and sit down.
Really? Afraid you might have to fly that bird?
We had a little time, and I was just looking the plane over, and I walked by, and I just peeked in the door there, and he says, "Come in and sit down."
Well, that's wonderful. I remember, Bill, you mentioned one little hitch that was overcome, but one of the unique things about each of these veterans had one thing in their pocket. Each of them. Elaborate a little on that, because that is so difficult.
After we got past the gate, now we pull up beside the plane. Now it's time for TSA screening. Now, on one hand, you're dealing with the men and the women who saved the world for democracy, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, because of Islamic terrorists, this is what we have to deal with at the airport. I mean, just because of World War II veterans, they're not going to let them just walk onto the plane. The problem is, a third of them are carrying a weapon. Well, what's the weapon? Pocket knife. So TSA would gather a bag of knives this big, write their name on it. So stupid, you know. So they get the bag, and then the captain would look out the window and say, "Bring that bag up here." So TSA would run the bag up the stairs, hand it to the captain. Captain hands it to the flight attendant and says, "Give them their knives back."
I'm talking to people today and talking to their grandparents about their grandparents, and they said almost everyone to the one had a knife in their overall.
And we tried to tell them, but it's, we always dealt with it. And another great thing about going to the World War II Memorial, you know who was always there? I think he made it. I think one time he didn't make it was Senator Bob Dole.
Yeah.
He was there on our November flight when it was freezing. We had special stocking hats made, red stocking hats with Heartland Honor Flight on them that are a real collector's item now. And he was there in July when it was terribly hot. But he was instrumental in the funding of that and developing the World War II Memorial. And to have him stand there for the whole time, and there's other states coming in, and the senator would stand there, and we always told everybody, you guys remember this? Because he's so fragile in his body now, and he only has the one hand, and we always told everybody, everybody loves him so much that they tend to grab his, and you can see him wince if they squeeze his hand too much, and he's real fragile in the body, but guys would try to hug him and stuff, but he was in there every time.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, neat.
Charlie, if you're going to tell somebody that maybe hasn't seen this memorial for the first time, is there one specific thing or maybe that you wouldn't want them to overlook and make sure that they notice that, or to what to look for, or that you remember?
Well, that's a tough question. It's a complex area. It's like a little park, really. And to take it all in, you just have to step back a little bit and look at the overall thing. Individually, there's the fountains, there's the colonnades, there's the semicircle, and it's all very white and attractive. But it seems to me that in order to appreciate it, you really need to step back and look at the whole thing, because it's, like I say, it's a little park, and it's a park of, I think, of peace, really. I think war is kind of a dumb idea in the first place. Anyhow, this is a memorial to a very difficult situation that we got into. Yeah.
Bill, I want to ask you, you've seen it many times. You mentioned one thing to me that was interesting, was that about the Pacific Ocean was on the one end of. Could you describe a little bit more detail?
You have two arches. You have the Atlantic and the Pacific on the other end. But one thing that's really neat for those of you that get the opportunity to see it is that they have the 400 stars. There's a wall with the stars on. Do you guys remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, each star represents 1,000 fallen in World War II. So that's a neat part of the memorial. And these guys are correct. It is so much bigger than people expect it to be. And so when our buses would unload and they would make their entry in, they would just leisurely walk around, and those in wheelchairs, we had all our guardians and push everybody around so they could read about, there's different battle descriptions and such on there, engravings, and even on the backside, only some people know this, on the backside of it, there's the little caricature, Kilroy was here. That's this little detail that not everybody knows about. But it's kind of fun because as these guys get in there and they spend their time sitting and just observing, well, there'll be student groups there from around the country, and they'll visit with the World War II veterans. We had a situation on our first flight where a group of junior high kids from Columbus, Ohio, the teacher's grandfather was from Norfolk. Well, he found out that we were coming to town. That was the very first flight. And we showed up at the World War II Memorial, and here were about 100 junior high kids, the boys in shirts and ties and the girls in dresses, and they formed two rows, and our guys came off the buses and came down that line, and those kids clapped for an hour. I mean, some of these guys were crying, and I mean, it was, and then on the other end, as soon as they came through the students, there's Bob Dole standing there. I mean, whenever I run into those guys from the first flight, they always talk about all those young people that were there to greet them. And this happened with all the flights, was the greetings that they received at the airport, because there were local volunteers who would show up and wave flags. And so it was a hero's welcome, wasn't it, guys?
When we came back that night, real late, I couldn't believe how many people were waiting to welcome us.
Yeah. At the airport, yeah.
And then when we landed at Dulles Airport every time, they did the water cannon salute. So we would land and we'd be taxiing over, and then the pilot would come on and say, "Gentlemen and ladies, look out the windows." There'd be the fire truck sitting there on the tarmac, and they'd shoot the water arch over the top. Did it every time.
Oh, that's wow.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Sounds like you had a very memorial visit as well as seeing the memorial. Bill, to speed this along and wrap this up, there's a couple of questions I'd like to ask you. Honoring these veterans like you did, and you mentioned it many times, but maybe sum it all up in a statement or two. In your heart, what did you feel the most significant thing about it you've experienced?
Oh, I think it's the joy and the fun the veterans had with the pre-flight dinner, the whole thing. We had also had activities here at home for the spouses. We called it the home front.
Oh.
Well, a lot of the ladies were taken around town to various things. They had a pizza party and a lunch. The second flight out of Lincoln, the wives all had lunch at the governor's mansion. So we tried to think of this thing through so that there was fun for everybody involved. But the veterans, the satisfaction that all the guardians received from watching their enjoyment, that's the fun part. And it was a great time, and people all over Nebraska stepped up financially, and people volunteered to go along and be guardians and volunteers and such. And so it's, I've been to 25, 30 funerals for honor flight veterans. I'll bet a third of the time I walk up to the casket and the veteran's wearing his red shirt.
Really?
So it gives you an indication of what it means, or what it meant to them to get to go on the honor flight
And
to see the World
here
War
they
II.
are today,
Yeah,
but they're vertical.
they are.
Are we hardly?
The second part of this is that you had many of these, these 1,500 people that you took to Washington. Were they scattered all over the state of Nebraska?
Well, that's one of the proudest things we are about the whole effort, because we were very concerned from the beginning that people would perceive it to be just another Omaha Lincoln deal and everybody else out. So we were very cognizant of that. We ended up taking veterans from 250 towns around the state, north, south, east, and west.
Wow.
And in fact, the very first newspaper to do a story about it was the North Platte Telegraph, which was perfect, because that got the word out west, and those applications started to roll in. So a lot of Omaha guys, were on later flights, which is fine. They
Sure.
got to go. So.
Well, North Platte happened to be the USO.
Well, that's
And that was-
canteen.
Because they're very patriotic in that area.
Yeah.
The thing that I was thinking about is that this format, this discussion that is developed here by Toastmasters, a panel discussion, do you feel that this type of communication vehicle could be used in all these little cities throughout Nebraska that have these honor flight people?
Oh, absolutely.
To bring out the meaning, and as we were receiving ourselves, the enlightenment of could this be something that could be replicated and duplicated? Again, maybe in essence a honor flight from the memorial back to North Platte and
Sure.
the various towns. Do you think do you see?
Oh,
that
absolutely, and Nebraska is a very patriotic state anyway, so there's a lot of recognition of veterans on Memorial Day and Veterans Day, of course, but I hear about different events that local communities do to honor their veterans, and particularly World War II veterans, and so this format absolutely should be encouraged for other towns to record the message from the veterans while we can, and so younger people can understand, because with younger people, and this is just human nature, but a World War II veteran is just that old guy that takes a little longer to get his billfold out at the grocery store or at the post office or whatever, or driving slowly down the street when you want to go 80.
with the blinkers on?
But they have no clue what these gentlemen went through when they were 18, 19 years old. I mean, World War II, they just have no idea.
Do you have a record of the people that went on the flights in the towns where they were served?
Oh, yeah.
Would it be since the unveiling of the monument was on the 29th of April in 2004, 7 years ago, and it was made public on Memorial Day weekend, is it a possibility that this format, a discussion format by Toastmasters, and would it be a good thing to communicate with those communities that have these honor flight people to come together like this at a American Legion or church or some group how would we go about contacting those communities?
I think the easiest way would be through their small town papers. Would probably be the simplest way of a press release to the small town paper. We could work up something on that.
Would we start it with North Platte?
North Platte is a very good town. I spoke out there at the Fort McPherson National Cemetery near North Platte last Memorial Day. Have you ever seen that cemetery? That looks like Arlington.
Yeah.
On Memorial Day, it was beautiful, all decorated. That's that National Cemetery at Maxwell, actually. And so Yvonne and I went out there, and there were over 50 honor flight veterans from the North Platte area. They're in their red shirts in the audience that day. Yeah, that's great.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, so that's a great area. Yeah.
I think that I'd like to ask the people here that as any of you or veterans that have been to see the monument or the memorial in Washington. Brad?
Mm-hmm.
Is anyone else? Brad, would you like to comment a little bit on your experience and your feelings when you saw this for the first time?
Oh, sure. My dad was a veteran, and so there's a slight connection. He was in England during the Korean War. So he wasn't involved with World War II, but nonetheless, having the veteran or the military connection, I was just in total awe, of the sacrifice that these people, gentlemen, both female and male, gave to our country, and just trying to kind of walk in their shoes and try to realize or put myself in that place, on the battleground, fighting for your country, on foreign soil. I just couldn't fathom, what that even would feel like. But it really wasn't until I was in the midst of the memorial that I really, grasp that, or really put myself, or try to put myself in those shoes. It was a very humbling experience, a gorgeous monument and memorial to the people involved who gave their lives for us. It was just, it was an experience I've never had before. Just being in total awe of a symbol that will always be with this country and all of us, as generations go on. It was great.
Thank you, Brad. Anyone else been to the memorial? I would like to ask just all of them, and any questions that you would like to ask the panel, or Bill and Charlie and Ray, about your thoughts on the war and also the memorial, and some questions you might want to ask that we haven't covered.
Okay.
Terry?
Bill, you said you were 60, so am I. Okay, so we're the same generation.
Yep.
I went to the Vietnam Veteran Memorial 20-some years ago, and it was kind of a humbling effect where they always see the picture of the person putting their hand up and bowing, and it really was, because you thought about the people that you knew that didn't make it. Did you see that kind of an emotion with the World War II veterans when they went to the World War II veterans?
Yeah, it wasn't all wasn't backslapping and having a great time here. There were some gentlemen, it was difficult to even walk in there, and there were guys who passed on the opportunity to go on the honor flight because they don't want to dig that stuff up. It's all been tamped down, and they didn't want to have to relive it. So there were guys that passed on the opportunity, but it was emotional. Not only with the World War II Memorial, but see, we also went out to Arlington for Changing of the Guard, Tomb of the Unknowns. Well, if those of you that have seen that is something that everybody should see, and that's as emotional as anything. And we would stop at Korea, and the Korea Memorial, I think, is outstanding. If you see it at night, with those soldiers walking through that rice paddy, I mean, it is something to see. So, there were other experiences in Washington. Then we would drive around so they could see the Capitol up close and just get a quick view, because we were in and out same day.
I see.
I mean, we were serving breakfast at on the airlift, we had breakfast at 3 a.m. I don't know about you folks, but there's nothing I enjoy more than a 3-day-old bear claw at 3 o'clock in the morning.
You know, I never even got a bit tired on the whole trip, and it was 26 hours, I think, we were gone.
It's funny he says that, because everybody always says, I'll bet these old vets, I'll bet they all sleep on the way home, huh? Well, the joke goes that on the way home, the veterans have gotten younger, and the helpers have gotten older. And plus the fact, on most of the flights, they got free drinks, so some of these guys are about half silly by the time, they show up, you know.
Free drinks, I remember that.
Second flight. So.
Any other questions, Vicki?
Bill, how did you get started in this?
Well, about 3.5 years ago, Yvonne and I read a magazine article about honor flight, and we thought, well, why not Nebraska? So she wrote a press release, Heartland Honor Flight. I'm a sales rep. I drive around the state, so I kept a stack on the front seat of the car, and every time I drove by a newspaper office or a radio or television station, I dropped one off and dropped one out in North Platte, and that started it. And then, I mean, we were lucky. I mean, the big break was that Larry the Cable Guy, Kara Whitney called me, married to Dan Whitney. So Kara said, what's it going to cost to send the first plane load? I said, just the plane is $70,000. Kara said, done. Whoa, this is easy. And so then Lynn Ziegenbein called me. Lynn Ziegenbein's executive director of the Peter Kiewit Foundation. Lynn said, we want to help. Well, they helped $365,000 worth.
Whoa.
Then the funny one is, right before the airlift, guy called me, says, how short are you to do your airlift? I said, I'm short 115 grand. Guy says, I'll make you a deal. He says, you promise never to reveal my name. I'll send you a check for $100,000. I said, let me think about it. 1,001, 1,002. I said, you still there? And he said, yeah. I said, all right, I'll do it. So
What took you so long?
Yeah. Total raise was $1.2 million, and a lot of that was big sales and coming in from all corners of the state. So there weren't all that many big dogs in it. It was just regular folks just raising money. And so $1.2 million and 7 flights and 1,500 got to go. And we had a good time, and they got to see their memorial that was built for them. Because what's the point of building it
That's right.
if they don't get to see it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's a testament to the generation that's why there was such a delay. They didn't come back in 1945 and jump up and down and say, we need a memorial now. They all got on with their lives, trying to raise their families. And it's a generation that believes in duty, honor, country, self-reliance, personal responsibility, and no whining. What a concept, huh, baby?
Yeah.
So, we all owe them a lot.
Any other questions? Luann, would you like to say anything?
I'm curious, when you see young men going off to war today, if you could give them any advice, what advice would you give them?
Charlie?
That's a tough question. There are so many different crafts and trades in the Army that have to be filled, and so the jobs are all considerably different. But I'd say keep your head down and do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's a different environment, of course, than Civvy Street, as we call it, and it's hard for young men sometimes to accept the authority of articles of war, and it's unfortunately some young men rebel against discipline, and that kind of ruins their life sometimes. So I think the main thing is to recognize that you're now under control and you've got to do what you're told. That doesn't sound like a very exciting thing to tell people, but it's really important.
Ray, what would your advice be to a young man going into service?
Well, it's so much different now than it was then. When I grew up, you didn't have any money. You did things without money.
Mm-hmm.
And now it seems like the dollar is, you can't do anything unless you have a bunch of dollars. But back then, we never knew what money was really. After I got out of the service, I bought a car for $25 and I got insurance on that car, and it cost me $13 for a year's insurance for liability and comprehensive.
Now that $25 is buy a quarter tank of gas.
Fill the gas tank.
I'll give you $50 for that car.
You still got it in the garage?
No. It was a 34 Ford, and that was a good car to go 90 miles an hour.
It would be worth that much today too. I want to give my answer to that, Luann, was that when I went into the service in Korea, we were getting on the train in Creston to go to Chicago. I was going to enlist, and my dad said to me, just as I getting on the train, he said, "John," he said, "there's going to be times when you're in the service that they're going to tell you things to do that you don't want to do. But here's the kicker. And when you do them, make them think you like it." And I followed that advice down in my life, that there are a lot of things that I have to do in life. But when I do them, I let everybody think I like it. That, to me, was as good advice as I've ever received going into the service. And that was my advice from my father. Here's a man from Korea.
And I have a question about how you, what you felt like when you came back home from the war scene. Some may have felt post-stress disorder like depression, or may have felt guilty, or some may have felt like being relieved from a very terrible scene. And I'm just wondering what you felt like when you came back home from the war scene.
Who wants to take that question, Charlie or Ray?
I'd like to comment real quick on it. I was sitting in Belgium waiting. We were doing numbers everybody came home according to their numbers, you know, and we were listening to the radio, and they were telling us how we're almost certain to have a depression because 15 million, that's a figure, so it's hard to comprehend. 15 million people had been in the service, and almost all of them were coming home. And the commentators were saying over and over and over how there's no way the economy can absorb 15 million people, and therefore we're going to have massive unemployment, we're going to have a depression. It was a dismal forecast all over the place. So we came home. None of that happened. All of a sudden everybody went to work. All of a sudden everybody was doing something. And then once you had a job, you went to the grocery store, or you went to dry cleaners or whatever. And everything worked, and we had a prosperous time. I keep thinking that World War II was a stimulus package, economically. It's not a nice way to look at it, perhaps, but I think that's really what it was. So when we look at the stimulus package and debt and everything, it relates back to what happened then. And we got through it just fine. And all those commentators were dead wrong. And it was quite discouraging to the veterans, to the guys about to come home, thinking, oh my God, everything's going to go to hell. And it didn't. One comment.
When I went to college after the war, I had 8 roommates who were combat veterans in the service. And here I was, 18 years old, right off the farm, and I'm telling you what a different type of culture that I walked into that I'd never experienced before. But you mentioned the stimulus package. I'd like maybe comment on the effect of the GI Bill at that time, Charlie.
There are those, I've read this many times since then, that the GI Bill was probably the best investment the government ever made, because it stimulated a level of education that would not have been achieved. And consequently, we had a much better educated population that could do more things. And it makes it, just like the Marshall Plan, restored the countries in Europe, particularly Germany, and the Marshall Plan restored the next generation. It was without a doubt the best thing that happened for a long while. And it's so unfortunate that now they're cutting back on support for education in some areas, which is the ridiculous thing to do. Yeah. So.
GI Bill, those veterans that went to college, they were obviously a more serious student, and those gentlemen were in a hurry. I mean, they had been.
Well, I learned what AMVETs meant.
Yeah.
The only bar in town.
Well, think of the heyday. That's a good point. Think of the heyday of the American Legion and VFW, and that was the entertainment to take the wife to the American Legion local post on Saturday night, and both organizations are struggling to get the younger veteran, but there's so many diversions now. It's just more difficult.
Don't forget the slot machines.
And the slots now too.
In Omaha, American Legion was #1 in the nation, and Lincoln was the only one that, because liquor was a drink, you had to buy. We had the private clubs. They was a private club, so that was an inducement for membership as well.
Sure.
But maybe I remember my cousin was in Germany, and he wrote back and says, in Germany the schnapps were really great here, and his mother thought they were ginger snaps, and he never explained to her that one. Well, to wind this up, I'd like to make one closing remark, and the thing that I got today from listening to you and listening to the panel, I think the message that I got is that the monument or the memorial of World War II has even a higher purpose. And that purpose is that I think this is probably maybe a time in history when the states became united to save the United States. That's what I got from this discussion. And I want to thank you all for being here, and it's been a wonderful experience. And I hope that the memory lingers on with you as well as with the memorial and worship. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Picture is really the best.
What does your brother do?
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to see you guys.
Was he your butt captain?
Yeah, he was our bus captain.
No kidding.